Good afternoon to everybody here in the room and to our audience online that is both in Washington, D.C. and abroad. We're very happy to welcome you to this event on urban transportation. I am Caroline Heider. I lead the Independent Evaluation Group, and it is my team who has undertaken this evaluation. I think in many ways there is no need to really introduce why this topic is important. Anybody who lives in cities, and most of us do, over half of the population lives in urban centers, and this percentage is growing, has faced enormous traffic jams, sitting there wasting time and thinking, how can I get to my destination and how can I get there faster? The extent to which urban transportation is available, and I mean public urban transportation is available to citizens in cities, is relatively limited, and these systems very often do not function very well. Above all, and this is a particular interest for us here at the World Bank Group, is that the poor and other vulnerable groups are very underserved. Very often, they cannot afford urban transportation because the tariffs are still too high for them. Very often, the transport systems are not connecting the poorest areas with the areas where they need to go to work because they have moved to marginal areas in the cities. So in addition, women face other problems related to urban transportation. Our surveys find that women more often than not walk to work rather than taking urban transportation for a variety of reasons. Now, having talked about all of these problems, urban transportation provides an enormous opportunity to make cities more efficient. The wastage in terms of people sitting in traffic jams, the enormous cost of environmental pollution on cities, on people's health, on the economy is enormous. And so addressing these problems, finding solutions to them is incredibly important, which is the reason why we undertook an evaluation of what the World Bank Group has done so far in this area. And in order to share lessons and help the World Bank Group do an even better job in pursuing this goal. This goal has been incorporated in the Sustainable Development Goals in the Agenda for 2030 because it is so important for human development, for economic development, for environmental sustainability. I have here today the opportunity, or we all together have the opportunity to explore the findings, and we have an incredibly important and interesting panel of speakers who will discuss the issues and drive the agenda further. But let me invite, first of all, José Luis Rigoyon, the Senior Director of the Transport Global Practice, who has been not only a subject of evaluation, but has been a very good collaborator in this effort, which is important to us in IEG in order to ensure that lessons are absorbed and then integrated in the forward-going program. So let me invite Luis. Many thanks.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. I didn't know I was a subject of evaluation. Good that I survived.
Now you know.
No, I think let me start by welcoming this IEG report for two reasons. First, it has brought to the attention urban transport in the context of cities. There is a lot that has been said about cities. Actually, urban transport requires more attention today, and this report has helped us enormously in bringing to the discussion the importance, the relevance of focusing on urban transport, and also the lessons learned. There are some interesting lessons that will be discussed later on. But why is so important for us? We are the Transport and Digital Development Global Practice. Why so important? This is a portfolio of around $8 billion in projects around the world. 20% of our portfolio, more or less, is urban transport, and it's growing. And it's not easy to maintain a steady growth because of the difficulties of engaging at the subnational level. So that's something that we have to think about how we do it in the bank. But let me refer to three things. Maybe what is our role in urban transport, why it's so important for us to be involved. Second, emerging trends and how our engagement is evolving. And then the third, going back to the report, some of our personal, how I appreciate some of the lessons that I think are quite impacting the way forward. As it was said before, so Caroline said it, cities are drivers of growth and home of the poor, right? Today, 80% of the output of the economic output is produced by cities, and there are 500 cities that produce 60% of. So we cannot deny that. And at the same time, we can see the growing welfare cost of congestion, for example, the most regressive thing that we can think in cities. And on the other side, the growth of slums, for example, as many people go to cities in looking for opportunities and they end up trapped in places where they don't have access or the access becomes prohibitively expensive. So slums growing, a bottom quintile of the population in urban dwellings spends disproportionate share of their income to access opportunities, 20% in some cases, and these are make it very, very difficult to compose as a poverty-reducing livelihood as a result of that. But there's something also that is emerging. So nothing more local than congestion, right? But actually, we're starting to see that these local issues have become national issues and global issues. So urban outdoor pollution, for example, is responsible for 4 million premature deaths, bringing the attention to equality. If you talk about the emissions, cities contribute to 70% of energy-related emissions. So it was not by chance that, say, when Mexico had the presidency of the G20, they put urban transport as a global issue, right? It surprised many. So now, let me now shift to the second point, say how our engagement has evolved throughout the years in response to emerging priorities. So this evolving trends, sustainable urban transport seen from a local to global issue, has forced us to think of more holistically integrated solutions that will address all these dimensions. So before 2005, for example, we were focused, the thrust of our engagement in urban transport has always been public transport, right? So we focus a lot on the efficiency of public transport, the introduction of equality, looking for solutions like bus rapid transit, that's a lower cost than metros, many options like that. 2005 and on is more an integrated system, holistic solutions that today is unthinkable not to consider, for example, bikeways and as part of the solution. When we did it before, I think it was Lima the first time we did it, it was just a solution for the very poor. Now it's part of a much more holistic view of the city. The lively city requires these kind of solutions. No? Similarly, in addition to increasing efficiency, we started realizing that now technology was bringing opportunities that were never available before. So all the efforts we had in the past to provide physical integration, now we're able to move through smart cards towards fair integration. And as we continue more and more the use of technology, unleashing the power, for example, of big data, what we are doing in today's projects is assessing, say, how a public transport system is allowing people living in the most challenging places to access opportunities. And we have a tool, for example, that measures that. So we have integrated technology in a way of that allows us to think differently about the problems we face and the solutions. It is very clear that the future of transport and urban transport in particular is automated cars, vehicles, shared, electric, and driven by big data. Now, finally, last point, why really excited about this report. First, calling our attention to Africa. And it's true. It has been challenging for us to develop strong urban transport portfolio in Africa. We have some very well-known interventions in Nigeria, for example, now recently in Dar es Salaam. We are very active in Kenya. You can see in recent time that this is evolving. But when you look at the pace of urbanization in Africa, it's unprecedented. Sean McLeod has produced a fantastic piece of analytical work that shows that cities are growing very, very fast and not connecting, unconnected and very expensive, and will be very expensive to serve with public transport in the future. So that is giving us some ammunition through your report, these analytical tools, to place this agenda as an urgent matter. We are acting in big cities, mega cities, when we should also be working and very actively involved in cities that are growing so fast that this is the time to use transport to produce a much more better planned urban development. The second thing that that called my attention is the issue of congestion. See, some of these mega cities in the world are reaching levels of congestion that are incredibly high with very low motorization rates. So that reinforces and gives us more ammunition to insist on public transport. Breaking silos. We need to create institutions that can work at the different levels of government, and they have to, at the level of the city, be able to integrate. There is a reflection also in us, right? So how we do it here in the bank, how we work together, for example, with our urban colleagues in terms for us to address together the issue of land use and transport, the planning of transport. And finally, the issue of the financial gap. Looking more attention should be given to the financial sustainability of the solutions. And these are big challenges that we agree that we have to take on. We have developed a global program, Leaders in Urban Transport Planning, for example, trying to address the capacity building challenge that we will face, particularly in certain regions, Africa being one. No? So thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity of being part of this report as a subject of evaluation, and also maybe how we plan to use it later on in our exchanges with clients and bringing the attention in the bank to this matter. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We would like to start. So my name is Fang. I'm the co-TTR together with Angel Stone for this evaluation. We would like to start with thanks to Caroline, to Jose Luis, for their leadership, and also our World Bank, IFC, and MIGA colleagues for their collaboration. We would like to thank our esteemed panelists, and we would like also to thank our advisors for their advice. These advisors are Tony Gomez from Harvard University, Robert Severo, who is also here today as our panelist, and we have Ajay Kumar now in India, and we also have Liu Ji in China. Lastly, we also would like to thank our team for working dedicatedly with us throughout the evaluation period. Now, Caroline and Jose Luis just mentioned the importance of urban transport, and Angel Stone and I, we are going to give you a brief overview on what has the bank group been doing, given the importance of urban transport, what has been achieved regarding sustainable mobility for all, and do we have any issues? And if yes, and do we have any solutions? So first is about what has the bank group been doing in the last 10 years. So in the last 10 years, the 3 World Bank institutions supported urban transport development in about 100 cities globally. And if we divide the 10 years into 2 evaluation periods, as you can see, the solutions and the support to urban roads and also the upstream solutions regarding policy, regulation, and institution, both in blue, remained quite steady. However, the support for public transport, which includes metro, urban rail, BRT, bus rapid transit, and the conventional bus, declined in the second half of the evaluation period. But this also partially reflected a surge of World Bank Group support to urban transport development right after the financial crisis globally in 2008 and 9. And out of the 25 billion investment, the World Bank took a dominant role in terms of number of projects and also amount of commitment. IFC in orange and the MEGA in gray accounted about 1.5 billion out of 25 billion total investment. And not surprising, transport and the digital development GP took a leadership role in providing urban transport solutions and support. Took about more than half of the total urban transport portfolio. So now the question we want to ask ourselves, so after 10 years of engagement and 25 billion of investment, what has been achieved? The bank group has helped our client countries increase the supply and enhance the capacity and quality of urban transport systems and services in our client countries. And in many countries, the bank group played a pioneer role in introducing innovative solutions. For example, in Tanzania, so the bank group launched its first ever light BRT in this country, and the system became operational in 2016. Also, by actively engaging the private sector, not only the service quality got enhanced, but also the financial sustainability got strengthened, just like the bank group has been doing in Brazil for the last 10 years. And the bank group also helped the clients mitigate environmental harms from urban transport systems, as evidenced by reduced GHG emission and also reduced local air pollution. We also noticed the bank group's influence went beyond its direct investment. By actively utilizing its convening power, not the bank group helped spread global knowledge, but also promoted South-South learning. And an excellent example is the Leaders in Urban Transport program, which was solely managed by the bank group. This program has trained more than 1,000 leaders global-wise. And when we were in India, we met many local urban transport professionals. Many of them told us they were trained by and benefited by this program. Now we know we have done a lot and we have achieved a lot, but are we free of issues? And the answer is no. So we did notice somehow the overall emphasis shifted from lower middle income countries to upper middle income countries. Just China and Brazil, these two countries alone, accounted for more than 25% of the urban transport portfolio. And then, just as Jose Luis mentioned, Sub-Saharan Africa region, while this region urbanized so rapidly, the support they received from the bank group actually declined in the second half of the evaluation period. And we also noticed the disadvantaged groups, the poor, women, the disabled, and the elderly, haven't received sufficient and constant attention from us. If you look at the far left-hand side of the bar charts, only 26% of the roads project provided targeted intervention to the poor, and only 7% for women and only 4% for the disabled. And if you look at the bar chart here, overall, among all the urban transport modes, women in orange and the disabled in green constantly received much lower attention as compared with the poor group. Now we know we have done a lot, we have achieved a lot, but we also faced with issues. So do we have solutions? And the answer is a firm yes. So now I'm going to hand this over to my co-TTR, Andrew Stone, who is going to give us a brief overview on what could be the possible solutions.
Thank you, Feng. What I'm actually going to talk about is a little bit about what we found works. And one of the things we found consistently that seems to work better is when the World Bank Group takes more comprehensive approaches. So, for example, when we talk about mobility, projects that included both supply and demand management aspects were 77% effective in increasing urban mobility, as opposed to 60% of projects that did not have this combined approach. What do we mean by demand management? Well, let me give an example. In Guangzhou, China, under World Bank GEF partnership, the city increased parking fees and applied car purchase and usage requirements, and thus was able to achieve not only some modal shifting, but a very substantial reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. IEG generally found that this comprehensive approach worked better. This also applied in environmental results, like as the example I just mentioned shows, but typically in environmental interventions, when there was upstream policy intervention or institutional intervention combined with downstream investment, that seemed to work better. And in projects that did both of these things, there was roughly 70% success rate. So that was an effective approach to work on both ends. Another thing that works very well is strong work quality. And here we saw a mixed bag. There were very good examples, but there were also some lapses where there could be improvements. We saw three areas where stronger work quality could improve performance. One was in economic and financial analysis. While the bank outperforms global averages, nonetheless, the analysis of project financial viability, costs, and timing was frequently optimistic, and sometimes left out key elements like maintenance. Timing was most often underestimated. IEG found 75% of projects underestimated timing, and this was by an average factor of 2.5 years. Monitoring and evaluation quality. A good monitoring and evaluation helps strengthen learning and accountability, as IEG will tell you at every opportunity. However, in some cases, data weaknesses and indicator inconsistencies across projects limited our ability to learn what works and what does not. For example, missing or inconsistent measures of mobility, an absence of baseline measurement, or sometimes limiting the ability to understand exactly how projects were working. Sometimes it's just missing. In another case, we went to Ghana and found the baseline had been conducted for one BRT route, but in the middle of the project, it was restructured and they picked a different route for which there was no baseline data available. Collaboration between IFC and the World Bank. If we want the new cascade approach to work, there's clearly going to have to be a lot of that. However, in many cases, we found communication and coordination between the institutions of the World Bank Group somewhat weak. As a result, there may be unrealized investment opportunities involving private service provision. Now, what is the way forward? And here I'm going to depart from our usual pattern, because typically at this point, IEG would make its own recommendations. But the recommendations I'm going to describe to you came from a pilot approach where we presented our findings to management, and management presented recommendations, which we then went forward to the board with. So what are these recommendations? First, to increase urban transport expertise, to create opportunities conducive to building a pipeline of urban transport projects, particularly in low-income and rapidly industrializing countries. Next, emphasize systematic analysis of affordability, access, and mobility for disadvantaged groups. So again, adhering very closely to our findings are these recommendations. Identifying opportunities for comprehensive engagements, particularly related to urban mobility management, road safety, and environmental sustainability. Incorporating good practices for project appraisals, results frameworks, evaluations, private sector involvement, and internal coordination to strengthen work quality. Systematically reviewing estimated versus actual urban transport project costs and time. This could help identify trends and inform future interventions. Agreeing across the World Bank Group on consistent mobility indicators and exploring arrangements for sustained monitoring of transport services. This could capture the long-term impact of interventions. And then identifying opportunities to collaborate across the World Bank Group, including private sector investment opportunities in urban transport as part of a cascade approach, and institutional mechanisms to encourage coordination among World Bank, IFC, and MEGA project staff and managers. And those are the recommendations coming from management itself. We're looking forward to receiving a concrete action plan, which we'll be monitoring over the next few years. And with that, we hope to promote the common goal of sustainable mobility for all. We're now looking very much forward to the lively discussion from the panel led by our director, Jose Carvalho. Thank you.
Panel members to join me at this time. Hi, Linda, how are you? Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I have to start by introducing myself. My name is Jose Carvalho. I am the proud director of the department in the evaluation group that did this fantastic job. And I am going to be your, I'm going to moderate the panel this afternoon. The format that is going to take, we have about an hour to discuss and have questions and answers session as well. The format that is going to take is going to be the following. I'm going to introduce each of the panel members, and I have to say, to echo the comment that Caroline mentioned at the beginning, we are really pleased to have such a top-class panel this afternoon. Also because they represent all sorts of, all walks of life. We have ownership, we have management, we have academia, and we have other members from NGOs, from the outside world. So what I'm going to do is to introduce each of them and ask one question, so that there will be like the opening commentary that they will provide, a specific question. And that will be followed by a series of questions from the floor. And then I will, in the meantime, I will also be taking questions from the Poll F, because as you know, I want to also welcome those who are not only here in this venue, but also those who are connected online or via WebEx. Before I start, let me remind all of you participants, those of you who haven't done it yet, to scan your badges before leaving. This is because that allows you also to submit questions afterwards, and also to submit questions to all of you using Poll F. Last but not least, if you are following the conversation on Twitter, please use #TransportMatters. Okay? So with that done, let me start by introducing, I'm going to start, I always do this. I'm going to introduce ownership first, out of courtesy, but also because we all know in IEG that the board is the one part of the bank that approves our budget. So it's important to be in good step with them. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Patience Kunene, who serves as the Executive Director at the board of the World Bank, representing Angola, Nigeria, and South Africa, since November of last year, or since November 2016, actually. Ms. Kunene started her career in the public service in 1994 as Director in the National Treasury of South Africa. Then she was seconded to the World Bank earlier in 1998, 1998 as a senior advisor, and then she returned later on in 2016, as we were saying, 2006. I got this wrong. 16, sorry. So a bit of information muddling here. So let me start with you. Now, the perspective you're seeing, we heard from Jose Luis that all transport portfolio in the World Bank Group is born important, but the urban transport one is particularly more important. Now, but you also heard that one of the limitations, one of the findings of the report is that there has been limited support for urban transport in Africa and in other low-income countries. What do you think that the African countries need in this space, and how can the bank group better support to move past this idea of concentrating on roads and doing something more comprehensive, as Jose Luis was suggesting?
Thank you very much. Let me start from a perspective of a parent, strangely enough. I think Africa has got the youngest population in the world right now, and we are urbanizing really fast. And the most important thing that you would look for as a parent in that regard probably would be starting with Mandela's quotation where he said, you can judge the quality of a society by the way in which it treats its children. Therefore, urban transport needs to incorporate elements of livability, also walkability, and it must be safe, and it must be a conduit to allow access to opportunity. So having said that, moving into a space of being a policymaker, what does Africa need from urban transport? I think we need all the solutions that were discussed today, but maybe to highlight a few, I would say there isn't a single solution that would capture everything. But looking at the urgency of the matter, regional transport hubs are very important. The need to incorporate technology in the solutions that are being advocated and traded to us, that would be a must. But also scalability, because a lot of solutions that you put on the table, if they're focused on one city, it's not going to help. I know that there are many measures of evaluating how fast we are growing. One of the issues is the need to look at cities as economic spaces where we compete. Even within one country, cities are competing with each other. But how much more when you look at a regional context, there's always going to be a city in country one competing with a city in country two. So urban transport becomes a competitive edge for each of the cities as they're attempting to grow. Then, because I don't want monologue, let me end with the financing gap. Given the scale of need, it's not going to be possible for the World Bank to provide all the solutions. So the cascade approach is important. What's even more important is regional integration. We've got examples of these in West Africa, in East Africa, in Southern Africa, where urban transport traverses spaces and it becomes part of the environment. Even when we are trying to attract investment into a country, you are able to say, come to Johannesburg. We have a metro train that will take you in less than 20 minutes from the airport to the last city, the capital city. That's pretty cool.
Thank you very much. Really, with your answer, you almost have prepared the terrain for the questions that follow. I'm going to do a little bit of marketing, if I may. You mentioned regional integration. It turns out that one member of the team that carried out this urban transport evaluation is also in an ongoing evaluation on regional integration. And the other member is also here in the audience, so that's something to look forward to. Now, I'm going to move now to management before we go outside the bank. I changed tax, just considering the answer that was provided by you. Now, Arturo, on my far right, Arturo Ardila Gomez, he's a lead transport economist at the World Bank. He works in the World Bank Transport and ICT Global Practice, and he co-leads the Urban Mobility Global Solutions Group at the bank, oversees a portfolio of transport projects in a number of countries, and also peer reviews extensively for all the regions in the bank. Prior to joining the bank, Arturo had an academic past as director of the Transportation Studies Group at Los Andes University in Bogota. And I will not dare mention the year that he joined because I may get it wrong. So with that information, it's enough for introducing Arturo. Arturo, clearly there is a scalability issue that Ms. Kunene has mentioned, and so there is a tall agenda, and the general agreement from management, as Andrew was saying, you yourselves identified the recommendations. Now, what are the feasible actions that you have in mind in your radar screen, the GP, Transport GP, to address and design these issues in a comprehensive way, taking into account all the bells and whistles, work quality, the issue of accessibility, livability, safety, etc.
Thank you, Jose. So this is the first time that, as Andrew explained, that it's World Bank management that produces the recommendations. For us, I think it was a seamless and natural process. We couldn't understand how it could have been done otherwise. With that in mind, we are developing a response or a matrix of actions that I will try to summarize informally because it's not officially approved yet. But the philosophy beyond that matrix is to incorporate one of your recommendations on improving monitoring and evaluation. So we are developing a strong matrix that is replicable by other teams. So if I'm not here and I get killed in a crash tomorrow, other teams will be able to hopefully replicate what we said in that matrix instead of just saying carry out surveys and not to who or what. So let me begin with monitoring and evaluation. We are piloting and strengthening monitoring and evaluation across all our oncoming operations, but also those that go through midterm review or our restructuring. We're pushing for that. The agenda is comprehensive, as you said, and we have a myriad of hopefully substantive actions, starting with the country partnership frameworks and the systematic country diagnostics, to try to work at that level to showcase the importance of urban transport. And again, what you don't measure, you cannot manage. So issues like gender, vulnerability, working affordability, if we don't have proper monitoring and evaluation frameworks, proper results chains to incorporate the latest lingo, if we don't use sub-indicators, for example, that say we're measuring travel time, and maybe we can disaggregate it by gender, because women happen to do chain trips. They drop off the children, most likely than not. They then pick them up, take them to the doctor. So for women, if we need a separate indicator on something as basic as travel time or on an indicator of affordability. And it's measured differently than the master indicator on travel time door to door or boarding time to exiting time from the bus. So we're working with teams again to help them improve how to measure and telling them, yes, you can measure it, and debunking the myth that in a proper monitoring and evaluation framework, if you have 10 pages with 15 lines in total, people say you have too many. But it happens that half of them are sub-indicator by gender and by income group and by disability. So this is just my opening statement. There is more to come, so let's continue with the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Arturo. And I have to say two things. One is that when you emphasize the monitoring and evaluation, the performance indicators, that's music to the IEG ears. But we do hope, again, as a manifestation of this safety target, that you are here with us for a long, long time to come. and there are no nasty stories. Now, just to keep focus on management, and also because Ms. Kunene mentioned the cascade approach and maximizing finance for development, let me turn to my far left and introduce Ian Twing. Ian is he's a manager of transport in the IFC, is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. He has been IFC's global manager for transport since, go ahead.
Not even going to guess.
Okay, since September 2014, I hope we get this right. And he has worked double-digit number of years in IFC. I'll leave it at that. Specializing for the last 10 years on infrastructure investments and working in a number of regions. One of the things that I have from your bio, which was very impressed, is that he has a past as a central banker. He worked in the Bank of England, so that gives you quite also an interesting perspective, particularly when we are talking about scaling up finance. So Ian, with all the razzmatazz and the importance that maximizing finance for development has and the renewed focus on private sector, how are you going, from your perspective, how is the World Bank Group going to scale up? Considering that, you know, over the 25 billion years, 35 billion of commitment in urban transport, over the last 10 to 12 years, only about 14-15% was IFC and MIGA. And together with that, if you don't want to answer now, we can do it later on. What about this improved coordination across all the institutions?
Thank you very much, Jose. And I'd like to thank also IEG for inviting me to come and talk today, and for the collaborative process we've had in doing this evaluation and getting to the results of having recommendations that we've come together to do. So just very quickly, IFC over the last 10 years has done about $500 million, just over $500 million. You saw it in Fang's presentation earlier. Of that, we've done some BRTs, some trams, some metros, but the vast bulk has been roads, and the vast bulk has been investments with municipalities. And sorry to say it, a lot of that was actually with middle-income municipalities. Now, one thing you can say within IFC is success begets success. So when you have a successful project, you find other people want to copy it. And so municipalities until 2-3 years ago was a rather marginal part of our business. And in the last 3 years, we've had a big focus on the cities initiative, trying to make them more livable spaces. Some part of that is about urban transportation, but it also covers things like, you know, water, sewage, waste disposal, and so on. So I think going forward, IFC kind of has 3 strands that we're focused on in terms of urban transport. So one is ramping up the city's business, and that can be working with municipalities on urban transport. The second part of what we're trying to do is to look at how to bring the private sector in more systematically. And so one element to that is looking at, for instance, how can we do more BRTs in Africa that might engage the World Bank in terms of doing the hard infrastructure, but IFC providing financing for the rolling stock and so on. And we kind of do it as a partnership, which goes very much to the cascade. And as part of that, we could potentially draw on some elements of the PSW, the private sector window, to make it more affordable, to buy down some of the risk for the private sector, to bring in local currency fares and so on. And then the third strand, and Jose Luis referenced it earlier, is we've been doing quite a lot of thinking about how emerging technologies such as autonomous vehicles, but also electric and transport as a service, what they will mean for the future of urban mobility. Clearly, there's going to be a sea change in how we get around cities in the next somewhere between 5 and 20 years. So to the extent we're financing BRTs, that may make a lot of sense. But in terms of thinking about a new metro system from scratch, maybe that's something that we want to think very carefully before we embark on that. So we're thinking about those issues as well. And we have a venture capital team that engage with folks in the Silicon Valley, et cetera, that developing these technologies. Now, as part of the recommendations, we've agreed that we're going to have a quarterly meeting where we're going to basically coordinate between IFC, the World Bank, MIGA, on how we can develop more in urban transport. So that's one concrete thing that we're doing. We've also committed that whenever we look at a project, we're going to evaluate, you know, how affordable is it, and then try and take into aspects of accessibility for disabled folks, for women, etc., etc. So we're going to be much more systematic in our evaluation on those things. Maybe I'll stop there and we can continue the discussion as we go along.
Thank you very much, Ian, particularly for your emphasis on those softer aspects of project design that is always very important. I'm going to now turn to my immediate left and introduce Melinda Hanson, who is the Deputy Director for Global Designing Cities Initiative, which is hosted by the National Association of City Transportation Officials. Melinda, over the past decade, has worked with a range of international organizations and on initiatives to promote sustainable urban transport and support cities to adapt to climate change. She has a lot of experience working on public transit projects with the Asian Development Bank, for example, and as a strategic advisor and in other roles. Now, Melinda, you, together with Professor Cervero, who will introduce later on, represent the outside point of view. So those that we want to hear from you from a critical, just constructive perspective. And I would like to, the opening question for you is how are NACTO and other NGOs addressing the sustainable transport, urban transport challenge? That is including environmental, climate change, resilience, social inclusion dimensions, quite complex when you think about it. And how do you see the interaction between that, between yourselves and the World Bank Group in that complex space?
Thank you so much for the invitation. So NACTO, GDCI, and a number of other nonprofit organizations that work in the sustainable transport space tend to work really closely with local governments, thanks to generous support from foundations. So my organization right now, it has support from Bloomberg Philanthropies to work actually with some World Bank groups, as well as another handful of other grantees on road safety projects. We embed ourselves very deeply in the cities that we work in and work very closely with the local practitioners to set goals, to develop strategies, and to assist them along the way to see projects through to implementation. And from my perspective, when I think about what the World Bank offers versus what nonprofit organizations can offer, I think obviously the bank excels at some of the larger scale institution building, national level, and other larger scale agencies. Obviously, you guys know large scale infrastructure in a way that most organizations and places don't. There's a lot of excelling in national strategy settings, so really getting a whole country on board for various strategies that could trickle down potentially to urban impact. And of course, the financial access and getting projects funded. Now, where nonprofit organizations come in and maybe add a little bit more value is some of the longer term, deeper technical assistance, right? Like seeing the project through. So not just from a concept phase, but through the implementation and making sure that some of the really detailed pieces don't get lost. Just as one example, what we see around the world is that when you have a larger scale transit project, pedestrian accessibility and safety is not often considered. In reading the evaluation, I noted from one India example that pedestrian crossings were one of the first things to get cut from an urban transit project in Mumbai. And there are many, many examples of things like this. So the NGOs can really play a crucial role in ensuring that these details are done right and that they remain priorities in the implementation of a transit project. Let's see. So also, I think some of the innovation side of things, right? Because nonprofit organizations were not driven by our clients in the same way that private organizations or the banks are. We really are at the forefront, I think, of a lot of innovation. And I was very pleased to hear from Jose Luis at the beginning the comments about bicycling, because bicycling is no longer just a cute little side project. It's a real transport solution, and we're seeing that in places around the world. So bringing that kind of new thinking and new expertise that the bank may not have. A lot of NGOs have this expertise and can support the development of packaged projects and other things, essentially, to get those things considered and built. And I see a lot of opportunities for deeper collaboration. I don't know if I should go through those now or pass it back to you and try and touch on those a little later.
Okay, thank you very much, Melinda, for your words of introduction. And particularly, you reminded us of the importance of road safety, but also one aspect that perhaps always gets overlooked, and that is the importance of sustainable implementation. The idea you have to be engaged or embedded, as you put it, with project implementation to see it through. Now, last but not least, I'm going to turn to my right to introduce Professor Robert Cervero from the University of California at Berkeley. So Robert is professor in the Department of City and Regional Planning, and he works in the area of sustainable transportation policy and planning, focusing on the nexus between urban transport, land use systems, and other policy aspects. He's also the director of the University of California Transportation Center, which is a multi-campus research center devoted to advancing economic competitiveness, sustainability, and livability in the transportation sector. His current research focuses on the intersection between infrastructure, policy making, economic development, integration of BRT, and hybrid services and other technologies, including bikeway network performance. So with all your experience and looking at it almost as an outsider, we rely on you to put a little bit of order and consideration of this complex yet very important urban transport. So this is the question for you. Given global trends in urban transport, what are you, from your vantage point of view, what are the challenges for developing countries to strengthen the approaches to urban transport and spatial planning? How to build capabilities to support more inclusive and integrated urban transport systems?
Okay, so first of all, thanks to IEG for the invitation to be on the panel and to serve as an advisor on your evaluation. Yeah, that's a big set of questions there. Let me just sort of maybe piggyback on some of the themes that have already been raised and sort of build on my background as a planner, and I think it's really apropos and important to the bank as it thinks ahead in terms of its activities in the transport sector. You know, we heard a lot this morning about rapid urbanization, modernization. I'd like to focus on two aspects of that I think are critically important, thinking in 5 to 10 year time horizons. One is motorization, and the other is kind of what I'm calling formalization. And when motorization, I think we'll all recognize as incomes rise, car ownership rates rise. So we've had this very explosive meteoric growth in car ownership. But if you look at the really low-income countries and lower middle-income countries, and to some degree even middle-income countries like China, the real explosive growth has been in these two-wheelers, these motor scooters, these mopeds, these e-bikes, and so forth. And they're incredibly efficient users of space. They squeeze on a lot of vehicles, but they create a lot of pollution problems, particularly when you have two-stroke engines. Very high road fatality rates, 30 times higher than four-wheel vehicles. But one of the big problems is they've taken over the city. I mean, it's not only road space, but parking and sidewalks and other places. So we've heard a lot about active transport and walkability, but it's so hard in the lack of management and planning for this explosive introduction of these kind of modes to really achieve this livability, walkability element. And I've been working, for instance, in Ho Chi Minh City. They're building a metro system and a BRT system, and they're really at the same time trying to promote transit-conducive, transit-oriented development, pedestrian-friendly transit-oriented development is a way of thinking about BRT and metro as not just a mobility investment to shape the growth of the city, to create a more sustainable, climate-resilient city. But they can't do this because these two-wheelers have just a thicket. They've taken over parking lots, they've taken over sidewalks. You just simply can't create a high-quality, pedestrian-friendly environment without the management and planning for that. So, but in this respect, I think there's opportunities here as well. You know, we've heard about autonomous vehicles. These are going to be the really disruptive elements in the next 10 years. Well, if you're economists and you believe in the Kuznets curve, this will tell us that as income rises in these areas, these levels of two-wheeler ownerships are going to convert to four-wheel vehicles. But by 2025, I think by most projections, we're going to really see mass production and assimilation of autonomous vehicles. And that might really be fortuitous. It might correspond when you have very rapid motorization and car ownership rising in Africa, South Asia. So I think there's tremendous opportunities through a planning lens to think about how do we redesign cities. If we have shared mobility, and I happen to believe that's how people are going to get around that. I mean, if you disconnect people from the practice of driving. Not only do you create safer cities, less accidents, but there's no longer this desire for vehicle ownership. So I think everyone buys in the shared mobility. So instead of 30% of the land area of cities being parking, we can now infill and have more compact cities, and instead of designing for parking, drop-off zones. But there's a whole different way of managing cities with these kind of disruptive technologies. We heard about MaaS, mobility as a service. I mean, with these vehicles, mobility just becomes a form of conveyance of unrelated individuals, not unlike people movers at airports or elevators in buildings. So you know what the big challenge is institutionally, to create these concierges and broker organizations that link providers and integrate pricing and so forth. So you really have seamless fluid mobility. So I think there's a tremendous challenge, but again, I think the very places that are going to be rapidly motorizing in the next 10 years have tremendous opportunity to really ride that wave and create a different kind of sustainable urban form, and at the same time achieve much better mobility outcomes. Just very briefly, we saw a lot of images here of bus rapid transit, and I think this is another major kind of disruptive arena in the sense that a lot of cities like Dar es Salaam, I've been working a lot in Transjakarta and Jakarta, they're displacing what historically have been these small, sort of semi-informal paratransit modes, minibuses, microbuses, and so forth. Yes, they potentially are providing better mainline services, but these little vehicles penetrated low-income neighborhoods, got into narrow streets that the big buses couldn't get into. And a lot of times they provided weekend, late-night services that the big buses don't. There's a real threat of the quality of services diminishing by formalizing public transit away from these informal carriers to this much more standardized kind of mode. Yes, it might relieve congestion in certain senses, but there's real concerns about that. Not only that, but the displacement effects. There's a whole supply chain of not only operators, but mechanics, fare collectors that are tied to that industry. So Jakarta, for instance, Transjakarta, what it's done, it's worked with Kopaja, Metro Mini, some of these microbus operators to integrate them into the BRT system. They've hired them, and they've done it largely, the incumbents have been willing to join, through basically hiring them and training them as formal operators. And they've removed the sort of incentive where all their income was based on number of passengers. It's now a fixed guarantee salary. So there's been some very important progress made in these very fronts. But I guess my appeal to the World Bank would be, in light of all these rapidly unfolding disruptive trends, that planning is critically important. And it's not just operational planning, the integration of urbanism and transport investment. It's critically important we think of these investments not as just mobility investments that move people from point A to point B, but fundamental ways to shape cities in ways that create much more sustainable climate resilient outcomes.
Thank you very much, Robert. Particularly also, not only for the answer that you have provided, comprehensive, but also for the focusing and reminding us that of the crucial importance of land use and city design as part of the solution to these complex urban transport challenges. Now, there are a number of interesting questions that are coming through Polev, which I have here in front of the screen. But before we tackle some of them, I would like to now, I think we are doing very well. Yeah, we have about half an hour to go. I'd like to open the floor for those of you who are here to ask questions to the panel. You can address the question in general to all the members of the panel, or one particular if you would like. There are microphones that will be made available to you. And if you don't mind introducing yourselves and then formulating the question. No taker? It's always, okay, it's always someone breaking the ice. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you to the presenters and to the panelists. My name is Tony Karasani. I work with InfoDev, a trust fund here at the bank that helps entrepreneurs through incubators and accelerators. So I wanted to ask, because we talked a little bit about the importance of private sector engagement, and the professor also just mentioned a couple of issues with these smaller buses. In South Africa, InfoDev supported at least 2 startups that I know of that are related in this space. One of them is AfterRobot, that was an app for users that were waiting for one of these small buses, or a matatu as we call it in East Africa, would know when that bus was coming. Another one was Go Metro, which worked with the train system in South Africa. So my question is, I guess it's most apropos for Ian from IFC. How do you see or where do you see opportunities for the World Bank Group or the IFC to kind of support similar startups and better engage private sector going forward? Thank you.
Shall we take a couple of more questions? Let's take a couple of more questions, and then we will, rather than having one-on-one. Yeah, you have another one. You introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. My name is Cesar Barraza, and I'm a Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine. So my question is related to a hearing that I just came to at the Senate, and they were talking about energy infrastructure and how new technologies like electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles need a step up in the infrastructure that is going to be created. So now taking those technologies to developing countries, how do you see, or what are your insights on the next level of innovation and technology that has to be brought to these countries to actually being able to implement those technologies?
And I take your question is not just from a technical point of view, but also from an institutional capabilities point of view, right, in the client countries.
Yeah, that could be, and maybe addressing issues like climate change as well.
Okay. One more question, and then we have this round. Anyone else would like to ask? Okay, we have another member here.
My name is Daniel Perea. I work with IFC. My question is, particularly for Professor Cervero, one of the issues that I think we face constantly when trying to engage with cities is this difference between the political cycle and the implementation cycle of any sort of infrastructure. With transportation, it applies also to transportation. Do you have any recommendations on how or where we could try to cut the implementation cycle of infrastructure connected to urban development to make it more suitable to the political cycles that cities are subject to?
So a question about the political economy involved in this, long-term investments with short-term political cycles. So the first one, Ian, is addressed to you, private sector engagement, but also if there are other people that would like to chip in.
I'll comment too.
Comment too.
I think I just turned it off. Hello?
It's called disruptive technology.
Yeah, I can't even use the microphone. I'm so good with technology. So IFC actually has a VC group that has an envelope for investing in early stage startup companies. They don't get in at the very, very early stage. They're more focused on the Series B. Sometimes they go A, sometimes they'll go later. Over the last 12, 18 months, we've actually had a very good cooperation with them, where we've looked at a number of different businesses in exactly this thing. So they've been looking at truck load boards, basically trying to match up the truckers with the cargo so that they don't drive around empty for half the time. They've invested in some motorboys, so doing taxis, doing inner city deliveries, coordinating the moped driver so he's maximizing his load through the day. They've invested in and looked at different companies providing like the data mapping. And also exactly what you were talking about, the bus. There was a company in Sweden that was offering to municipalities that they could tell them when the buses would be coming, sort of on a live database, rather than, one way of doing it is when the bus passes a certain point, it registers. The other way is to actually track the bus, and tracking the bus is better because it's more accurate. And the value for them, for the company, was that by getting that data, they would then have a clear map of where is the congestion in the city, which as you get to having more autonomous vehicles, that will become very useful, valuable data to have. We're also thinking with those guys about the systems you require when you get to autonomous vehicles. And honestly, we don't know the answer in terms of deploying that in emerging markets. I lived in Turkey for a while. I think what I've learned going around different countries is every country has a norm for how it drives. So in Cairo, they don't care if they hit you. In Turkey, they will look like they don't care, but in the end, they will stop an inch away from you. And there's some kind of weird etiquette of if I have an overlap, I get in, and if I don't have an overlap, I don't get in. And I guess the challenge for autonomous vehicle developers is to learn what those etiquettes are so that they can then get that technology into developing countries. I'm going to stop and let other panelists say something.
Ms. Kunene, you wanted to chip in on this one?
I have.
Oh, you have, okay.
All right. Yeah. The speaker who referred to InfoDev, I am from Johannesburg. That app really, really works because you can track the train if you are taking the train to the airport on your phone, and you download it once, you use it in different situations, even on the local train, not the speed train, you are able to use that. So the role of private sector in that, it's fairly difficult for big banks to engage at that level because it first starts as a very micro effort. And what has sustained those kind of businesses in South Africa has been the availability of venture capital and also funds, sometimes which are supported by the municipalities or different levels of government. And those funds, because by nature they tend to be grants, they enable those who are first movers on the technology to test and get usage. And when they've got sufficient data, they are able to approach financiers, not necessarily banks, but financiers at any level. And then eventually they are able to approach bankers. And I think there's scope for this to work all over Africa, because you would know from East Africa, the matatus, they're always readily available. In Kenya, for example, Nairobi, you can get a scooter as a form of a taxi instead of a formal four-wheel drive. If those apps are available, it would make moving from cities to city, for example, I'd say, let's say Nairobi, but from a suburb like Karen moving into another place, it is much more viable to finance something like that. So it's possible. Yeah.
Very good. Arturo?
I want to use the question on private sector engagement to link it with the IEG report we're discussing today and how it has served practitioners like me to steer the dialogue with the client. So first, we applied Cascade. This is an anecdote coming from, I'm preparing a project in China. We applied Cascade in China. Very precarious experience on PPPs. Mostly state-owned enterprises are the ones that bid for SOE, to participate in PPPs. We want to make it more meaningful. So step one in the Cascade is ask the question, can the private sector undertake it? No. Then second part is, what policy reforms need to happen? I'm preparing what we call here at the bank an investment project financing, brick and mortar. But IEG in the report said not only apply Cascade, but also hold policy dialogues. That's my interpretation, maybe not the correct dialogue. Because you guys in transport, tend to think policy dialogues happen only in terms of development policy lending. And this was an eye-opener when I read the report by IEG. Wait a minute, the brick and mortar projects can also have policy dialogues. We link it with the Cascade, we're linking it with road safety, we're linking this policy component with not only, as I said, the Cascade road safety, also transit-oriented development, urban development. We're taking an advantage, and we always say, no, but IEG told us to do this, which is a great opening with the client to say, please read the report. We have a new way of approaching things and linking all of these elements. Thank you.
Professor, would you like your perspective on private sector?
I'll see if I can sort of thread the dots here. So there were sort of questions tied to how to do implementation and the role of the political economy in advancing sustainable mobility and emerging technologies. So, you know, I mean, I happen to think when it comes to planning and investment in mobility, the public sector really should focus largely where there's just natural scale economies, natural monopolies, that is building backbone networks, bus rapid transit, metros, whatever, and tap in more or less the private sector for economies of scope, getting diversity of service types and prices, appealing to different markets. And I think that model where it's been implemented has worked pretty well. I happen to believe, as it relates to public transport, a model like Hong Kong, where you really have a public transit agency, which is a quasi-private entity. They sell shares of the company on the Hong Kong private stock market. So they have an incentive to be very entrepreneurial. They have to pay dividends to shareholders. But the majority shareholder is the government. So they're serving a public good, a public purpose, and also being very entrepreneurial. And where that gets translated is roughly a third of their income comes from air rights, transit-oriented development. They recapture the value and invest a lot of money of creating great, livable, walkable neighborhoods around stations. But I think it really took that institutional reform to really allow those kinds of results to really unfold. Electric vehicles, I think there's no question that is the future of private mobility. Though it'd be nice if these electric vehicles, the 3 or 4 seats were full, that we had shared ride electric vehicles. Clearly what's inhibiting it somewhat is we just don't have electric charging distribution networks. So that's clearly a logical role for the public sector, along with investing in clean source energy that ultimately is producing the onboard electricity. I think there's critically important roles on the public and the private part. That the final question that was kind of posed to me is, the political economy context. Well, if you look at the places that have managed through good transport land use integration to achieve very positive economic outcomes, they tend to be places, be it London or New York or Paris, or that are extremely walkable, great public transit networks, and companies want to be there, and they hire folks because they're highly livable and efficient and sustainable. Politicians like that. I mean, if they think of transport land use integration as an economic development strategy, as a way to recruit and high-skilled workers and companies, I think you begin to get politicians on board. The truth is, though, we have to have affordable development for working class folks, so it clearly has to be inclusive. But I think politicians really are keen to a lot of the things we've discussed here, because they view in the strategic sort of intermediate to long term, these as very successful ways to grow economies. So.
Don't know if that works. Let's use this one. This one does.
So on all of the panels and discussions that I've been on in the past couple years, it seems that a lot of the new mobility technologies, autonomous vehicles kind of things, really suck a lot of air out of the room and take a lot of attention. And so I would just like to remind us that while we are getting distracted by these new technologies that could very well be fantastic and solve a lot of issues, we already have solutions that we're, for some reason, not tapping into now, right? And again, I'm going to get back to the pedestrians and the cyclists. There's a lot of potential here. In a lot of places, like in Addis Ababa, where I'm currently working, there's still 80% of trips are made on foot, right? So when we think about, do we want those folks, we obviously want the access, we want the sustainable transit, we want all of those good things, but we have an opportunity to get people on 2 wheels, right? To get people on electric bikes, to get people on foot and make these trips a lot better. And it's a lot cheaper, by the way, too, right? We can retrofit the existing streets that we have using just some simple paint and other kinds of methods, and we could really go a long way. So I would just like to make sure that we're remembering to think about that. And when it comes to NGOs and the World Bank's role in this kind of things, I think that there's a large role to play in helping to shape our cities through design and through planning in a way that ensures that these new technologies don't come in and recreate the same issues that we have with automobiles. That these new technologies come in and achieve the sustainability, the social, and the other types of goals that we all in this room are fighting for.
Thank you very much, Melinda, for that eloquent call for action and coordination. And talking about coordination, one of the questions that is coming from the Polo F is directed to my colleagues at the extreme of this panel, and that has to do with one point that Jose Luis raised at the beginning, the idea that it's important to coordinate among the World Bank Group institutions, right? But not only among the World Bank Group institutions, but also among the World Bank institutions and the client countries at different levels of government. how do you see, what are the booby traps? How do you see these things advancing to make it also, both Arturo and Ian, how do you see this advancing to make it, the implementation of the cascade approach more agile, so to speak?
So I think we've committed as part of this that we're going to be meeting regularly to talk about projects, the potential projects, the pipeline. So I think that's one thing that sadly we haven't necessarily been so good at historically. And you know, for IFC, over the last 3 years, we've focused a lot more in terms of systematically engaging with municipalities, which is the sort of country level that we get involved in most frequently. So obviously, I think that's a continuation of that, and a rolling out of that from the easier middle-income countries to finding the municipalities we can work with in lower-income countries. Arturo.
That's between IFC and World Bank, but what about within World Bank, Arturo? I mean, we're talking about the importance of land use design, developing urban resilience, including also in urban transport systems. So here we have a potential dialogue to be enhanced between GP Transport and ICT and GP SER, which is the equivalent of urban, for those of you who don't know the acronyms of the World Bank. It's a very easy question to answer, I know.
Well, let me say that we need to debunk some myths.
Okay.
On Cascade is this idea that is floating around that if we in the World Bank Group work on Cascade, in the World Bank side of the World Bank Group, IBRD, we're just generating business to IFC or to other multilaterals that don't care about Cascade and therefore will give the loan without the policy changes and the trying to facilitate. We have to debunk that myth. We're one World Bank Group. Now, on SUR and the transport and digital development with our new name adopted this week, and SUR, our social, urban, rural, and resilience colleagues, IEG found that actually they have a good chunk of the urban mobility portfolio. And IEG says SUR needs to work more with transport colleagues, but also transport. In our response, we said we need to work more with SUR colleagues, because we are carrying, for example, accessibility analysis. We have a tool. We're working heavily, and also in the context of sustainable mobility for all, to understand how an urban transport project improves access to opportunities. But land use is critical. So if we don't have a land use specialist from SUR, enlightened one, hopefully one that will not call for over-regulating and enacting even more regulations, then we can have something that works, that within a transport project, we can achieve transit-oriented development at a lower cost, benefiting particularly the lower bottom for 40% of the income distribution.
Thank you very much, Arturo. I'm going to open the floor again for people in the audience who would like to ask questions. See, we have maybe 2 or 3 questions in the next round, and then we wrap up.
Thank you, panelists, for the great answers you have been going through. I have 2 things from both practitioners and academics on the podium to help out. First of all, I think the IEG report said, and very pointedly, that we do demand management, mainly through infrastructure, building roads, building BRT, building sidewalks. And I know, Bob, for example, you have traveled far and worked far. What kind of comprehensive TDM policies, for example, pricings, that we should integrate as part of an urban transport investment, really bringing the cohesive action to the city? Second of all, how do we bring the state-of-art practice to urban transport? That's not only about, say, buying electric buses, really about the state-of-art in operations, and that could be very nitty-gritty down to the ground level. So how, from your experience, how can we do that? For example, in DC region, this GTFS data is no big deal. The high schoolers are programming it, are taking it for analytical purpose.
Speak closer to the microphone, please.
Sorry. So the GTFS, high schoolers are doing it here. How can we introduce those kind of things as part of the whole package to our developing country partners? Thank you.
Thank you. And I take it you are from the World Bank?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not talking to
No. It's just that you didn't introduce yourself, or at least I didn't realize it. Another question from the floor? Okay, so I think that we're talking about prices and we are talking about comprehensive, once again, approach. Any member of the panel who would like to take this on board? I mean, when we talk about prices, we talk about affordability as well, which was mentioned by some of you. Turo?
IG report, again, welcomed very much for saying demand management. I am doing work on understanding the huge load of implicit subsidies that cars received on parking on the sidewalks. Every city I go, I take pictures of cars parked on sidewalks. They're not paying those cars for parking, let alone for the externality and the risk on pedestrians and babies on strollers that have to use the street where cars are going at 50 kilometers per hour. It's a subsidy for the car. And the exaggerated congestion that Jose Luis was referring to, and Caroline also in the opening remarks, is in large part not only because of poor management of the transport system, lack of traffic lights and so on and signals, lack of education, but also because cars are subsidized. And any good that is subsidized is overconsumed. At the World Bank, we need to talk more about proper pricing for car use.
I guess I would pretty much echo that. I mean, the truth is, all of our experiences in the developing world certainly is that any supply side strategy is ephemeral. I was just in Bangladesh where they opened a big flyway. Within a day, it was full. There's so much pent-up demand to occupy that road space. You just can't build yourself out of traffic congestion. So obviously, we need to manage it. Pricing is, I think, the smart way to go. Economists have long sort of argued that. My sense, though, is probably the low-hanging fruit is parking, that there's so much mismanagement of parking. It's free or it's underpriced. In San Francisco, it's been estimated downtown about 25% of the miles traveled in the core city is just people looking for parking. So how can we just dynamically set the price so you always have a vacant space? I mean, you price enough people out, or you have efficiency of movement. So we can use technology to navigate people to the closest spot. But I would happen to say we also have technology to real-time price where you're at, when you're at, how much you're contributing to congestion, to send that right price signal and get people to behave responsibility. I think if we use prices to really incentivize people to feel what I think is the most wasted resource in the urban transport sector in a lot of settings, and that's 3 or 4 empty car seats. So we change these vehicles to micro-transit, and we're somewhat allowing people big discounts when they have full vehicles, be it sort of dynamic ride sharing, kind of Lyft ride, and some of these kinds of services out there. So we have the capacity with technology to send the right price signals, not only to discourage excessive car use, but I think to also incentivize people to fill cars and have very efficient forms of microtransit. So.
Pricing mechanism? Yep. Do you want to comment, Melinda?
Just really quickly, actually, because most of what I was planning to say, actually, Robert just said very eloquently. I mean, I think the fact is that we're not going to solve any of our congestion or climate issues unless we have shared transit. And all of I think one of the ways that technology and phones in particular are proving to be particularly promising is that there's a lot of opportunities to actually finally do things like congestion pricing and do things like smart parking management that will help to manage the demand.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd add much. Just note that I remember in the 80s when I was doing my high school geography, I was taught I shouldn't build any more roads, or we shouldn't build any more roads because you just add to congestion. And I think, there's a version of the future called hell, or we call it hell, which is you don't price for the car coming through the city. And then if you have an autonomous vehicle, it's not going to have one person anymore, it's going to have no people. And so you have to do the pricing and plan for that today.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to finish as I started, and then giving you the opportunity, Ms. Kunene, to give us some concluding remarks based on the sort of the wide scope opening comments that you made. Have you seen this being corroborated by the questions and the answers?
Yeah.
Anything that you would like to add?
Probably on the angle of land use and land management, I think in the rush to do new things, we may neglect to look at the basics just the management of a town, if you don't get the question of how land is used, who has access to it, at what time, when you are doing densification, where do you locate people, services, including housing, and planning for a longer time span. Instead of maybe 20 years, we need to think even longer. And also there's a question of if you have a youth dividend in Africa, since we have so many young people, how do you incorporate into your planning the fact that there's going to be transition in terms of the demographic? So all the new issues that we're thinking about now, they're very exciting. They're at the cutting edge of what needs to happen, but we still need to look at the basics, get the basics right, because a lot of middle-income countries and developed countries give you a model of congestion, of a lot of difficulty in using space, whereas in a lot of African cities, it's urban sprawl, not so much densification, but just the sheer difficulty of moving from point A to B. So that question of land and land management in your solutions on urban transport, I really still want to argue that we have to look at it with due regard. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kunene. I couldn't think of a better way of concluding this with these remarks, and also your focus on the youth, which obviously is the future. Thank you, all of you. The only thing remaining is to wrap up this. Thank you, all of you, for being here, those of you who have been following us on WebEx. And if you were kind enough to join me giving a show of hands, I'll thank all the panel members here. This meeting is concluded, but you know that the urban transport agenda continues. Thank you.